This week on The Real Review, we're going to be talking about Yarra Valley. We're featuring the Yarra Valley all week, which means that all of our articles and all of our wine reviews are focusing on Yarra Valley wines and wineries. Today we're going to be focusing this tasting on reds. And of course the history of the Yarra Valley was very much to do with the Cabernet grape variety and the Bordeaux blends. So we're starting off our tasting with Yarra Yering Dry Red Wine number 2, vintage 2019. This is a Shiraz-based wine. It's mostly Shiraz, but it has some other varieties in it. Secondly, we're going to be having Payne's Rise Cabernet Sauvignon 2018, which comes from the Upper Yarra. And finally, Levantine Hill Syrah 2017. They call it Syrah, not Shiraz, but it's the same grape. Syrah just refers to a more Rhone Valley style of Shiraz. I'm Hugh Hook, and you're watching The Real Review. So Yarra Yering Dry Red Wine number 2, vintage 2019. A very eccentric way of labelling and naming a wine. What we've got here is not just a Shiraz, it's a Shiraz blend. It's got some Viognier and Marsanne, 2 white grapes of course, and a bit of Mataro. But when you sniff this wine, there's an extra dimension to that nose, which takes me to some of the Mataros that come out of the Barossa. There's this particularly earthy, stony, graphite kind of spiciness that you get with Mataro, and this wine has got a bit of that in it. But there's also a lot of pepper, not too much pepper. It's not overpowering, but it's just one of a complexity of aromas that flow from that glass. It's a beautiful, beautiful bouquet. And the palate does not disappoint. It continues the theme. It is a beautiful wine. Elegant, intense, piercing, penetrating, powerful, but not big wine. It's medium to full-bodied. There is great persistence to the palate, but it's not a sledgehammer. The tannins are very fine and very measured and beautifully integrated with the flavour of that wine. This is a great food wine, and we've chosen as a match for this wine a food with a bit of pepper in it. And it's a garlic and black pepper beef dish by Adam Liaw. And I think that beef with, you could do pepper steak, you could do lots of things with some peppery influence to them. Japanese peppered dishes. Beautiful. So we're about to taste the Payne's Rise Cabernet Sauvignon. Payne's Rise is a newish winery. It's only been around for a bit over 20 years. It's in the Seville region, which is a little bit off to one side of the Yarra Valley, a slightly cooler sub-region of the Yarra, if you like. The vineyard is cultivated by the Cullen family, and the wines are made by Hoddles Creek winemaker Frank Camorra, who has quite a very lofty reputation as a winemaker in the Yarra Valley. And it's got a classic Cabernet bouquet of, so complex. It's got tobacco leaf, it's got briary characters, it's got a little bit of nori or seaweed type character. There's also the black fruits there, blackberries, black currants, but the wine is so much more complex than that. It's very, very multifaceted and not so easy to describe. And again, typical of the Yarra Valley Cabernet, it's not a big wine. It's medium to full-bodied, and the tannins are not big, clunky tannins. They're very fine, restrained tannins, which just caress your tongue and provide the structure that's necessary for a wine like that. They don't give you a big grip at the finish. They don't give you astringency, certainly not. Beautifully balanced tannins. The acidity is there, but it's not particularly noticeable, as it should be. It's just understated. The wine has got lovely flavours and good texture and good length. As for a food match, we've decided lamb is the best thing with Cabernet. Even if you go to Bordeaux, the home of Cabernet, they often serve lamb with their red wines. and we've chosen a recipe called butterflied barbecued leg of lamb. Levantine Hill, their first vintage was 2012, and only 10 years ago, but they have already started making some of the better wines in the Yarra Valley. It's quite an extraordinary story. This wine is the Levantine Hill Syrah 2017 vintage, but let's have a sniff. Very, very spicy and fragrant and earthy and dried flower petals, dried stalks, dried herbs of various kinds. It's a really, really interesting and complex nose. But there's a lot of pepper there as well, which is part of the variety, of course. Other types of spices, cumin perhaps, Indian spices definitely coming out there. Let's have a taste. Lots of dried herbs and spices. There's a bit of thyme. That is gorgeous. There is definitely a whole bunch character about this wine, which are those undergrowth and forest floor, and sometimes a touch of Italian bitter herbs like Campari, that sort of thing. You can smell in wine which has been partly bunch fermented with the stalks in the fermentation. It all gives an extra degree of perfume and complexity to the wine. What do we think it should go with? We've decided on macaroni cheese, which is one of those classic dishes. You can serve this with anything with protein, meats, even fish, but cheeses and dishes that have cheese are really good with a wine like this because it's not a big wine. It's an elegant, medium to full-bodied wine, and macaroni cheese with a bit of bacon in it. There's a little extra meatiness, and extra protein would go really well. So good health. If you've enjoyed this, follow us and subscribe to The Real Review.